Hey, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for tuning into the Five Flavors. Today's going to be a little bit different, folks. We're not going to talk about happiness. We're going to talk about conflict because you can't get to a place of happiness until you get past the conflict. So you're going to hear about toxic conflict versus healthy conflict, the key emotions that cause conflict, why some conflict is good and actually necessary, the 4 conflict traps, and what to do if you find yourself in one. So get ready, buckle in as we dive into conflict. Welcome to the 5 Flavors of Happiness, hosted by Susan Piper. Today I am honored to sit down with the author of Don't Get Mad at Penguins and Other Ways to Detox the Conflict in Your Life and Business, Gabe Karp. Gabe Karp spent the first 10 years of his career as a trial lawyer, so guys, he knows a thing or two about conflict. He later joined a small technology startup as one of the key executives who grew ePrize, now Merkle, into one of the top digital promotion companies in the world. Gabe then entered the world of venture capital and currently sits on the boards of several companies in the Detroit Venture Partners and Light Bank portfolios. He has built and led successful teams, negotiated business and finance deals in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and frequently speaks on embracing healthy conflict. Crane's Business named Gabe as General Counsel of the Year for the state of Michigan in 2011. I cannot believe Gabe is on our show. We are so grateful to have you, Gabe. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's great. It's great being here, and just listening to that, it sounds so much more impressive than it feels. It's like, wow, I wonder who that guy is.
Well, that guy is pretty darn impressive, guys. You have to get his book. It is basically, and Gabe mentions this in his book. He was like, we teach kids when they go to school how to do math and science and social studies, but we don't teach them how to manage conflict. I thought that was such an interesting takeaway because we don't have classes in conflict. So this is your master class in conflict. So Gabe, I have a lot of questions, just a little bit of time. So I will stop talking and I will give the floor to you. And I want to ask you, one of the very first things you mention is the dangers of not engaging in conflict. Can you talk to us about why conflict is important?
Yes. I think it helps to understand that before even getting whether or not it's important, to just accept the fact it is inevitable. You cannot live a life without, if you're a human being engaging with other human beings, you necessarily will encounter conflict repeatedly. And a lot of people just don't accept that. And that's where you start to really run into problems, because when you try to and most of us try to shy away from conflict, we resist it, we ignore it. And of course, that's not going to make it go away. Oftentimes, it makes it worse. And when a conflict is ignored or engaged in an unhealthy way, because as you mentioned, there's healthy conflict and toxic conflict. Toxic conflict is really bad. I can speak in terms of organizations, and the book does, but I don't distinguish between personal life and professional life. But when you have unhealthy conflict, toxic conflict, team engagements are painful and client relationships are strained and individual careers suffer. And if someone is not performing well and they're failing at their job, or they're making other people's jobs harder, and you ignore that and avoid it and hope, oh, it'll just get better. It doesn't. It actually gets a lot worse, and it starts to spread to others. But when you look at the conflict for what I think it is, an opportunity to improve a relationship, find personal growth, then it's a lot easier to engage and you feel more empowered. So when that happens, people can work with one another and issues come up and are addressed without drama. You move fast. You have better relationships, stronger relationships. In business, you make money faster. In your personal life, you get to happiness. You get to a happy place a lot faster. So I'm rambling a little bit, but that's kind of the lay of the land.
Well, it's so true, because in corporate, and I work in corporate, There are times where there are some people who I purposely don't engage with because I don't want to go into conflict, and I avoid them. And then the rumor mill starts, and then it's harder to work with them and things get delayed. So I've experienced that personally. But let me ask you, before we get into some of these, we wrote pre questions, folks. But before we get into them, so let me ask you on a personal note. So let's say you have somebody in the office and it's not going well. How would you start that conversation so they would know that I'm not being confrontational? I don't want to be adversarial. How do you do it?
Yeah, and some of this depends on the details of like the reasons why it's not going well. I'll just pick a random scenario. Let's say someone is just combative. They're just rude, mm-hmm. and like the person you're fictitious person, you just want to avoid them because the reason you don't want to avoid them is just who wants to deal with that? Like I just want to go about my day and not be berated or insulted or someone be dismissive of me. So a great way to approach that is with respect and honesty and transparency. And it's just when someone makes a rude comment to say, I don't know if you're intending to be rude, but I'm perceived that as a rude comment. And I just want to get to the point here. If I did something to offend you, I'm sorry. Let me know what it is. But the idea here is just get it right out in the open. Call it out, address it, because more often than not, the other person really isn't aware of their rude behavior. I used to think there's just a lot of people out there, they're just jerks and they enjoy it. And there are some of them, but far fewer than I thought. I think we're all dealing with our own stuff. And if we're angry about things or frustrated about things that are unrelated to what's going on now, sometimes that just comes out. So people are curt with one another, they're abrupt. So just kind of holding up a mirror to the other person and let them see how they're being perceived is remarkably effective. You can, when you try it, a lot of times you'll see the physical reaction of somebody. They'll be like, oh, wait, whoa, that's what I look like? Oh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to look like that. And I guess be prepared when you hold that mirror up to somebody and you call it out the way I said before. They might get defensive because you're now sort of letting them say, hey, you look like someone that I know you yourself don't like. And they're going to want to shut that down and not accept it. So they might be a little combative. Be prepared for that. And when they try to come back over the top of you, you can just say, hey, look, I don't want to affect you. I don't know what you're intending to do. I'm just telling you how I'm perceiving it. And then you're depersonalizing from them. You almost put it on yourself and you're being honest.
That's awesome. I agree. I think there's a lot of people who aren't self-aware. And maybe that's what it is just helping them see who they are or see how they're coming across and how it's landing. But conflict is hard, especially for a lot of people who are raised to be polite, don't make waves. And that's mentioned in the book. You talk about that, the hypocrisy that a lot of us grow up with, be good. Don't start fights, and how do you work past that? But I wanted to ask you one other question about the book, and this is because this happens to me all the time. I'll get into some kind of altercation with somebody, and then I'll go home or I'll go back to my desk, and 20 minutes later, or I'm in the next meeting, and I'll say, "Oh my God, I would have sounded so clever if I just said this," but I don't say it. I don't say anything. I stand there. What is happening and how can we get past that?
Yeah, this is our fight or flight instinct. We all know it. We all know exactly what it feels like because we all have experienced it many, many times in our lives. And I'm not a real science-y guy, but there is some science behind this. We've got over 1 billion years of evolution hard-coded into our DNA. We've got this fight or flight response. It's a survival instinct. We have something called an amygdala. It's a small gland, 2 of them on either side of the brain. And the amygdala are responsible for detecting threats and preparing the body for an emergency response. So when we perceive a threat, the amygdala sounds the alarm. And stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol flood our system, preparing the body for fight or flight. And we notice immediate changes, like our breathing becomes rapid and shallow as we take in more oxygen, preparing to attack or run away. But we also notice other changes, like a quivering in our chest, our limbs, our voice. We may feel heat flush our face, our throat constrict, the back of our neck tighten, our jaw set. And all this happens it's so instant and sudden. And we're in the grips of this highly efficient but prehistoric set of physiological responses. And they're not pleasant. Like, they're not meant for relaxation. They're designed to move us to action. And the amygdala also shuts down the neural pathways to our prefrontal cortex. That's just the part of our brain where we think and use logic and reason. And we don't have access to that. So hours later, when you come up with the perfect thing to say, that perfect thing was in your brain. You just literally did not have access to it because you're in this fight or flight mode. And being aware of that actually can help you disrupt it because, and by the way, appreciate it. You know, when our ancestors walked out of a cave and saw a saber-toothed tiger, kicked into high gear and protected them from the threat. And there were others at the time who had much less active amygdala, and they walked out of a cave and they're like, oh, saber-toothed tiger, cool. Those were not our ancestors. So
that was so funny. I read that and I laughed too.
I mean, so I've sort of like had gained this because it's hard, right? It's frustrating. It's like, why can't I just keep my wits about me in these moments of stress? And I'm annoyed that the makeup of me is such that I can't. And I've just come to appreciate it, you know, because if we didn't have that, we literally wouldn't be here. So I'd rather be here and deal with that problem than not be here at all.
So let me just ask you a question. So when that happens, are we even hearing the words that people are saying?
No, well, yeah. I mean, so the words are going into our ears and traveling along our auditory nerves, but they're trapped in the part of our brain where it's really hard to. Some of it gets through, and usually only the parts get through that make us even angrier or more fearful.
Oh, okay. So I think you called it cognitive bias. Is that it?
Yeah. Well, so there's confirmation bias.
Oh, confirmation bias. I'm sorry.
Yeah. We generally perceive all new information in such a way that fits within our preconceived notion about something. If we're dealing with somebody we don't like, then all new information, and maybe we don't like them for a specific reason, maybe they're egotistical, we're going to comb through everything they do and say to say, oh, there's another thing that proves they're egotistical. There's another one. And we disregard the raw data that maybe contradicts our preconceived notion. Confirmation bias.
How do you get past that?
Awareness is key. And I think the best, it's hard to distill this down to one thing, but for purposes of this conversation, I'd say curiosity is an amazingly helpful and powerful tool. If somebody is, let's say somebody is egotistical, and you believe they are, maybe not fight it, just be curious. Why are they egotistical? And then you're just approaching it with an inquisitive mindset as opposed to a defensive mindset.
Okay, so then the onus is on us to change how we go into that conversation.
It's always on us. Yes. And by the way, when we get angry, we get afraid, that's also on us. We are choosing to react in a certain way. Like bad things don't happen, good things don't happen, things happen. And whether we perceive them as good or bad is entirely on us. Now, a lot of people don't think about it in that way. And they would respond maybe to what I just said and say, no. There are people out there that want to do harm to us. They want to be rude to us. They want to disrespect us. And I can't control that person. That's on them. And I say, okay, fine. But how you react is entirely up to you. It's a choice.
Right. So I think we're kind of going into the emotions because you break down conflict into 4 emotions: fear, anger, judgment, and ego. How do we keep these emotions in check? Because you talk about how when one of them gets unbalanced, that's where the issue comes, because a healthy amount of fear is good. A healthy amount of anger or judgment is okay. How do you keep it in balance? Is it just being aware of it?
It's more than, it's being aware of it, but then there are some tools we can use to disrupt that instinctive response. You know, when you have a hormone like adrenaline or cortisol pumping through your heart, it's doing things that are very hard to control. But there's this instinctive response. So I would say when we are in the moment and we start to feel the physiological responses to conflict, maybe we feel the anger or fear behind it. But when you notice you're breathing faster, or your voice doesn't quite sound like your own voice, like your voice is a little shaky, and it's like, I don't want my voice to be shaky right now. Take one slow, deliberate breath and consciously think about it. I'm taking a breath. That will disrupt that instinctive response. It actually will, and it only takes a second, so you can do it in the heat of a moment. And what it does is, when you take that just one beat, you reestablish the neural pathways to the part of your brain where you can think. Like the connection kicks back in. And then it's like, okay, I'm here. I still feel anger. I still feel fear, anxiety, judgment. But you can be a bit of an observer of yourself as opposed to just tunnel vision inside it. And look, this takes practice. But most people never, ever even try. And I promise you, the very first time you try it, it's not going to be perfect, but you will feel a noticeable difference. You'll be able to look back a few minutes later and say, wow, that actually changed something. And then the more you try it, the better you get, just like anything.
That's so interesting. So you just need a moment of mindfulness, snaps you out of it, changes your brain chemistry, and puts you back into yourself.
Yeah. I mean, and realize what is specifically happening is you're reestablishing neural pathways to the part of your brain where you can think. And I said, take a breath. The internet's available to us, to look up many tactics, but in the heat of the moment, that's a great one.
Wow. So let's talk one last question about conflict. You talk about the 4 conflict traps. So can you outline them so people can recognize them and know how to either steer clear of them or pull themselves out of them if they find themselves in one?
Sure. Yes. So these 4, by the way, these aren't the only traps, but I'd say these 4 conflict traps, there's the bully trap, the need to win trap, the judgment trap, and the sorry, I'm blanking on my and the avoidance trap. That's the big one. We talked about that before. So I'd say that covers 85-90% of all conflict. The bully trap. The bully trap is when bully-like behavior has the unintentional consequence of pulling you into a trap with another person, triggering a fight or flight response in the other person. This is not like the bully on the playground. That person intends to be the bully. I'm talking about you are in the grocery store, you're at work, maybe you have urgency, you're just in a hurry, or you're feeling really passionate about something, and you kind of come at the other person a little strong because you just got this momentum you're carrying into it, and they misperceive it. And they misperceive it as an attack or anger, and their fight or flight response kicks in. In the work context, maybe it's a leader who's angry about something that someone on their team did. And the anger is natural and it's appropriate, but coming at somebody with anger to try to give them constructive feedback you're just injecting a toxin into that interaction. So, and we can get back to it because I know you mentioned the shopping list voice. We'll get back to how to just use that. Then there's the need to win trap. That's when the need to win in immediate conflict it basically eclipses and overshadows your larger goal that you began with in the first place. Maybe you're dealing with someone who, well, you mentioned egotistical before, egotistical and rude, and maybe they say something that is just wrong, and you can prove to them that it's wrong. So now you're in a debate. So I'm gonna beat this person in this debate. I'm gonna make them acknowledge that they were wrong, when that need to win and that endeavor is now delaying maybe getting buy-in from the rest of a group so you can come to a consensus and move forward with whatever you want to move forward with. That's, you're pulled into that need to win trap.
I see that a lot with politics and family gatherings.
Yes.
People need to win. No matter what side you're on, they always just need to win.
They do. And by the way, I'll finish these traps. If you want to, I have suggestions for dealing with these political,
Oh, awesome.
Angry uncle at the Thanksgiving dinner table and all that stuff. But so avoidance trap. This is the most common trap of all. We talked about fight or flight. This is flight. And it's any time that you were socialized. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all.
Yep.
Or you got this, I don't like my heart beating fast. I don't like my voice sounding like this. So you just avoid it. When, I don't care if you're at work or in a personal relationship, if you're dealing with someone maybe you're related to, and just repeatedly, every time you get in a conversation with this person, you just start feeling that way and you don't like it and you start avoiding them, that's not going to make that issue go away. And if you're related to the person, you may not have a choice. You may have to encounter this person repeatedly. So we can talk about ways to overcome the avoidance trap, but that's what that is. And then the judgment trap. It's when other emotions like maybe anger or fear, and also ego is not quite an emotion, but I took creative license. When they mix with our judgments of other people and they kind of create this toxic cocktail that is infecting the interaction. So I was trying to think of an extreme example. Let's say two scientists are working together on curing cancer and they're close, but one scientist doesn't approve of the other scientist's personal lifestyle. Maybe this person cheats on their spouse, so they judge them for it, and they're angry with them, and they don't want to work with them, and they choose not to because of their judgment. And as a result, cancer doesn't get cured. It's extreme. I made it up, but that's the idea here. We can work and engage with people that we don't like or we think harshly of. And I would also say, and I've been as guilty of this as anybody, maybe check yourself a little bit and not be so judgmental. Just be more accepting of people. By the way, that I think I know you talk a lot about happiness. That's how you get to happiness a lot faster. People consume so much energy just judging. And we do for a lot of different reasons.
Yep.
But that energy is taken away from doing the things that make us happy.
And comparing.
Yes.
Comparing. We compare ourselves all the time. I'm not at this place in my career. My house is not that big.
Right.
All the time. Can't help it. But let me ask you one last question before we go. Because I want to give our listeners some tangible strategies on how to shut down the need to win. Especially we're going into holiday season. I feel fall in the air coming. So that means Thanksgiving and Christmas or Passover, whatever you celebrate, is coming up soon. And there's going to be some interesting conversations with elections going on in America and a lot of politics. And this is not a political podcast, folks. So it doesn't matter to me what side of the aisle you are on. But whatever side you're on, people they dig in their heels. How do we stop this from ruining our lives?
Yeah. So it's funny because I did write a chapter that did not make it into the book about dealing with political conversations with people. And I was talking to somebody who I respect very well. I told him I was writing a chapter and he said, "Oh, that's going to be a pretty short chapter. Don't do it." And I don't necessarily agree with that. So I'll just share something that I do often. I travel a fair amount, so I find myself in Ubers for 20 minutes with a perfect stranger. And I start, I'll strike up a conversation. I'm a student of this. And when I hear the driver express some political opinion that I know I disagree with. And they're expressing it in a way that suggests that if I let them know what my opinion is, they're going to assign a whole host of other opinions on me and project all that on me.
Right.
And there's this tribalistic mentality that makes the other side not necessarily evil, but crazy, unaware. So I consciously kind of go into this thinking, I'm going to have a 20-minute conversation about this person. And my goal is not to persuade them to view their political position differently. My goal is to convince them I'm not insane. That at the end of this conversation, I get out of the car and my goal is that person says, oh, that guy, I didn't agree with everything he said, but seemed like a reasonable guy. And when that little switch changed all these conversations that I was having, because I'm a former trial lawyer. I like getting into it and mixing.
Sure.
And when I sort of steered into that direction, I had a lot of great conversations with people where what you find, and this is common sense, we all know it, is that people who have different political opinions of us, we all generally want the same thing. Mm-hmm. We want to live in, we want to be happy. We want to have lives that are have purpose and meaning, and they're fulfilling. We want to live in safe communities. We want, like all those things. And the political differences are how to go about doing that.
Yep.
And when you realize that there's no black or white solution. There's no just do this one thing and that fixes it. No, that thing may help. And maybe we do a little bit of it, but back it off in this area and lean in heavier on it in this area, and then allow these other things that maybe the other side is coming up with and combine it together. So again, convince people you're not insane. It's actually not hard to do if you're in fact not insane. So do that.
Oh, it's so crazy that that's where we are in the world.
It is. Unfortunately.
Oh my God, Gabe, I could talk to you for like another half hour, but this is a short podcast, so we're just going to wrap it up. If you have one more minute, we're just going to go right to the fast round. Is that okay?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Great. So, because we usually do talk about happiness. So next podcast, folks, we will talk about happiness. But I need to ask Gabe, you are happiest when
I'm with my wife and 3 daughters.
Oh, I love that. The best way to find happiness is?
I think find meaning and purpose. Mm-hmm. A life without meaning and purpose is a depressing existence.
If happiness was a place, where would it be?
Aside from wherever I am with my wife and 3 daughters, but for me, it's on a snowy mountaintop.
Oh, snow. Okay. Are you a skier?
I am.
Oh, fun. Okay. What one piece of advice would you give your 8-year-old self?
8-year-old's tough. I think I would say, I know it seems really hard to figure all this out, but you're never gonna, and that's gonna be okay.
Oh, that's so true. No matter how old you get, you're like, I'm still building the plane as I fly it. Okay, last question. If happiness actually was a delicious flavor of food, what would it be?
Detroit-style pizza. That's easy for me.
Awesome. Gabe, thank you so much. And listeners, please go out and buy Gabe's book. It will teach you the fundamentals on how to have healthy conflict, something that nobody teaches us. So, Gabe, thank you so much for writing this book. Thank you for coming on the show, and have a great day.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Have a great day.